Hi, everyone. A few months ago, we had Russ Dennis and Kara Stern from School Status as guests on the podcast. With them, we learned about how School Status platform can be used to promote engagement between teachers and families to combat chronic absenteeism. According to statistics released by the National Center for Educational Statistics, roughly 1 in 4 students nationally were chronically absent from classrooms in the 22-23 academic year, which means that they missed more than 10% of instructional days. In this episode of Teaching Matters, we learn about how School Status is being used in one Texas school district to also combat absenteeism. We'll be talking about that on this episode.
Welcome to Teaching Matters, a podcast exploring all things teaching and learning. Teaching Matters is produced by NPR affiliate WOUB Public Media in Athens, Ohio. And here is your host, Dr. Scott Titsworth, Dean of the Scripps College of Communication at Ohio University.
All right, thank you, Trinity. My guest today is Juan Duenas. He's the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services at Sheldon ISD, which is on the northeast side of Houston, Texas. Juan, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. To get started, I want listeners to kind of understand the context of your district. If they've listened to the podcast, they've heard about School Status, but can you kind of tell us about, if you were to describe your district to other people, what are some of the characteristics that you would put on the table to help us understand, what Sheldon is like?
Yeah, sure. So Sheldon is a school district. It's a considered to be a medium-sized district. We have about 11,000 students. We have 1,600 staff members. We are located in the northeast part of Houston. We're very close to the ship channel. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't realize that, but Houston is one of the largest ship channels, ship ports in the United States. And so it's very industrial. There's a lot of people that do blue collar work. It's a lot of economically disadvantaged. We have about more than 80% of our students are identified as economically disadvantaged. There are about 65% of our students are Hispanic. The rest are a mixture between African Americans, about 23, 26, it fluctuates. And the rest is a mixture of white, Asian, and what have you. Mm-hmm. So we're a very diverse district with a lot of different types of ethnicity, but the majority of our students are Hispanic.
Mm-hmm. And so we understand the size of it. How many buildings do you actually have?
We are and proud of still being a one high school district. Wow. Although our high school is extremely big, over almost 4,000 students. We do have 2 middle schools. Mm-hmm. We have 6 elementaries, and we have 2 early childhood academies. And so we serve students from 4 years old all the way to 12th grade.
Mm-hmm. And in your role specifically as the assistant superintendent, what sort of falls into your portfolio? In other words, what's the scope of your job?
So that's a great question. My official title is Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services. What exactly does that mean? Mm-hmm. It's a little of just about everything. So my job is to support our school leaders, especially our principals. We deal with mainly data and instructional and what that looks like in the classroom, but it also deals sometimes with parents. It may deal with transportation, really just about any type of support that they need. And we're very serious about that support part of it. Mm-hmm. My job is really to ensure that our principals are successful in what they do every day, which is, you may know, it's not a very easy job. Yeah. So you need somebody like me that can be connected, that has done that type of a job for many years in the past, mm-hmm. and is able to know what are some best practices and how to connect that to what the initiatives are at the district level.
So when I opened the show, I brought through those statistics from the NCES that, I knew that absenteeism was an issue nationwide. It did shock me, the scope of it. Can you talk about sort of the absenteeism issue in your district and what it is that I assume that you're trying to solve a problem. I mean, that's why you implement solutions in the first place, or you're trying to, progress the district in some way. What's the state of maybe where your district was at in trying to combat absenteeism?
So that's a great question. We at Sheldon are facing the very same challenges that most districts in our nation are facing. And so this started really right after COVID. So we noticed that during COVID, obviously, our attendance plummeted, dropped drastically. As we started to come back and having our students face-to-face instruction, we realized that we've lost that importance, the sense of urgency for parents to understand that coming to school is extremely important. I think it's because they were able to stay at home and be able to
Mhm.
do some of the instruction at home. This idea of coming to school started to get lost. And it's a nationwide pandemic. It really is.
Mhm.
It's gotten all the way to the federal government. And a lot of the districts were really struggling being able to bring their students back. And so we were facing that as soon as we came back. And we were able to realize that this was a big, big problem. I always
Mhm.
say this, there's only one type of student that we're not able to educate, and that is the student that doesn't come to school.
Mhm.
And so that is extremely important. As a matter of fact, the data will show you that the number one predictor of whether a student will be successful or not is his or her attendance. And so we realize that this is really, really easy. So that was the first component. The
Mhm.
second component that we realize is if we truly want to improve instruction and really make a difference in student achievement, we have to do the basic things correct. Well, what's more basic than having students come to school
Mhm.
on a regular basis and on time? If we cannot do that, we can, maybe adopt the latest programs and laptops and instructional materials and what have you. But if the student is not there, what good is it for? And so as soon as we started coming back from COVID, we started to identify some of those challenges that every other district is facing. And that's how we came about with school status and how they can help us monitor
Mhm.
some of that attendance.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just to tease out this issue just a little bit more before we transition to talking about your experiences with school status, the obvious implication that you brought up is if a student's not in the classroom, they're not going to be able to learn from the instruction. There are also other implications for the student, right? I mean, there has to be social implications of them, not being around their peers. Are there also implications for the district if you have a certain rate of absenteeism?
Oh my goodness, there's huge implications. So here in Texas, our funding is directly aligned to the ADA, average daily attendance. So
Hmm.
the state determines how much funding we get based on the average daily attendance of every single one of our students. So not only does it affect their students' educational program, but it tremendously affects our budgeting.
Hmm. Yeah, so there are not only personal implications for the student, but there are material implications for school districts in Texas, and I think nationally that would be a similar situation. So attendance is important. We know it's a problem we have to track. I think it's interesting that you saw a increase in absenteeism after COVID. I agree with that. I've heard that similar story from a lot of other people that I've talked to. So I think that that's an issue, and it's not just episodic because it's continuing after COVID is, still here, but behind us in terms of the shutdowns and things like that.
Correct. It continues to be a big problem. If anything, it's becoming a bigger problem. Problem. A lot of the districts are reporting that their attendance continues to drop,
Hmm.
and so that becomes a bigger problem as that continues to happen. We are proud here at Sheldon ISD to say that our story is exactly the opposite. We started really, really low. Our attendance right after COVID, this was about 3 years ago, dropped tremendously. And
Hmm.
so every year we've been able to see year over year growth,
Yeah,
an increase in the average daily attendance of our students. So we're very proud of that.
that's great. So how long have you actually been formally engaged with school status?
So officially, we began working with school status before it was school
Hmm.
status. I think it had a different name, but it's been the same company and the same parameters, same methodology. It's
Hmm.
been more than 6 years, maybe 7 years now.
And sort of the scope of how you use it in the district, is it applied through all grade levels, or how is it being used across the district in terms of who interacts with it?
So the way that I think so. Like I said, we've implemented school status about 6 7 years ago, but it really did change. Our relationship with them changed about 3 years ago, and it
Hmm.
was in conjunction with this idea that we identified this big problem, and we really wanted to tackle this problem and be able to come up with some serious solution. So to be able to come up with some serious solution around this, we realized that we needed one way to monitor exactly who are the students that are chronically absent, and to be able to facilitate that process and the data analysis so that our school administrators were not, having to waste, I don't mean waste their time, but it just takes a long time to be able to identify who are the students that are chronically absent and why is that the case. But be able to have your data at your fingertips is extremely important. Once you do that and you identify who the students are, how are we communicating with them? School status does help with that in the sense that they do send letters after a certain number of absences by any particular student. They also help us with that. But I think what really makes the difference is being able to have data at your fingertips so that you can begin to articulate and plan and implement adult actions around that one specific problem.
So in terms of the data, then, is that something that classroom teachers are using, or does it fall more up to sort of the administrators in a building or even at your level? I mean, who is actually going through this and trying to decide, okay, we need to take action because this student has reached a threshold or what have you?
So it really is a combination between the teacher and the administrators. So the teacher is the one that takes attendance every single day. And that is done in different platforms. Every district has a different one. We use a specific student informational system in which we keep track of the attendance of every single student. What you have to keep in mind is that a teacher is extremely busy, right? So what she's thinking is there's a lesson that I want to deliver today. There's a scope and sequence that I feel that I'm already falling behind. I need to take attendance really fast, be done with that so that I can get into the delivery of instruction. If I have maybe 1, 2, 3, or 5 students, it is what it is, but I need to teach the rest. And so that gets reported. Obviously, we keep track of all of those students that are absent. And then our principals at their end in the front office are able to see that. But they are also very extremely busy. They have parents that want to talk to them. They have classroom observations that they need to do. Maybe there was a fight in the hall that they need to address. Maybe there was enough, I don't know, food at the cafeteria. There's so many things that they have to deal with that for the most part, what we realized before COVID, it was just something that we did because it's mandatory, it's compulsory. We have to make sure we take attendance every single day. That data is turned into the state. And so it is something that we do and then we don't think about it. And so that was pre-COVID. After COVID, we realized those days are long gone. We need to make sure that we have a much better system. We need to be able to have that data at the forefront on a daily basis so that we can begin to make a change.
So if I'm a student in Sheldon, are there ways that I would interact as a student with school status, or is that more something that the teacher is and the administrators are dealing with? In other words, do I actually interface with that software in any way?
So students do not. Students do not interact with the software at all. It is at the teacher. It starts at the teacher level. The teachers have access to the platform, but it really takes place at the administrative level. That's where you can really make a difference, where the school administrators, and I mean the principal, the assistant principal, have access to their dashboard, and they'll be able to, and they're at a moment's notice, they're able to see who were the students that were absent in any given day.
And you mentioned previously that if I reach a certain level of absenteeism, there's automatic communication that is sent out. How do you approach the messaging in that communication? Because I assume, you're wanting to open a dialogue with the parent and say, hey, we have an issue that we need to solve here. How do you do that, from a way that opens dialogue rather than, sort of looks like they're just getting a letter from the school district?
And that's a great question because I think that's really what makes the difference. It is that communication with the parents and that constant dialogue that truly makes a difference. So let me answer that question by 2 parts. So first, let me talk about how it used to be before COVID. Mind you, we used to have this system before COVID and what we started doing after COVID. So with school status before COVID, it was very much let's take attendance. This system is going to send out the letters and let's just hope for the best and hope that everything is taken care of. So a lot of these letters do get home. And the way that works, if a student is absent 3 days or more, they get an immediate letter. And then I believe it's 6 days or more. And at a certain point, you have to create a meeting with the parent to find out exactly what's going on. So we allowed that system to take place. Nobody was really monitoring. We hoped that it worked. And to a certain degree, it did. But after COVID, that wasn't good enough. Parents are a lot more busy. Like I was sharing with you, attendance was dropping, highly concerning. And we realized that a lot of the times parents don't even look at their mail anymore. And so we were not connecting anymore. And so what we started to use school status was a little different. Why don't we begin to find out on a daily basis who are the students that are absent and begin to have those conversations on a daily basis. That's what makes a difference. Being able to connect and make a phone call to the parents to find out exactly where their child is at. And so we notice that if a student is absent, before we even take attendance, be able to make those daily phone calls to the parents. So that creates an incredible relationship with our parents. They realize you've noticed. You noticed that my son didn't come to school. They feel good about that. But it also gives us the opportunity to provide what we call just-in-time professional development. We are able to inform the parent, your child is absent today. These are the implications when a student is absent. And maybe they had a dentist appointment, and that's why they're going to be absent. Well, what time is the dentist appointment? Well, the dentist appointment is at 1 o'clock. Well, you can still bring your child to school so that he or she does not miss first, second, third, fourth period. And then you can still come 45 minutes, an hour, whenever you need to. Pick them up and take them to the dentist. A lot of parents don't know that. And so that makes a huge difference. Before COVID, we would have professional development for our parents so that they understand the importance about attendance. And what we quickly realize, the parents that show up to our trainings are the parents that don't need to show up. The parents that already understand why education is so important. The ones that I understand why it's so important for students to come to school. The parents that didn't understand were the ones that were not coming. But with this new system, we realized that it is not only just-in-time training and professional development for our parents, but is very targeted. It is the students that are missing, the ones that are getting the phone calls. It is the parents that are getting the phone calls, the ones that are receiving this just-in-time professional development. And those are the ones that we're making connections. Sometimes we find out that it's a bigger issue. Maybe they just got a divorce. And so we begin to connect them with our counselors, how we can do a wraparound service. Maybe the lights were turned off because they didn't pay electricity, and that's why they couldn't come to school. There's so many things that happen, especially in a district like ours at Sheldon ISD, where you have such high economically disadvantaged students. You would be surprised at how much struggle and what our students actually face on a daily basis, that you begin to make those connections. Once you make those connections, parents understand that you have the best intention for their kids. And instead of being a nuisance, another letter that I'm getting from a governmental office, now I have a connection, direct connection with that office staff member that I can ask questions, not just about attendance. That has made a difference. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how big of a difference that has made.
Well, it sounds so much more personal than, just a form letter that says your child's missing,
Correct. And I think that's what's made the big difference for us.
I assume, because of how you described, Sheldon, that you're dealing, as you said, with a very multicultural student and family population. Is there anything about, language differences that, comes into play, or cultural differences that comes into play as you're having these conversations with parents?
Oh my gosh, yes, that is a huge implications on what we do. We do have a very large Hispanic community. And so for us, we have to be able to have dual language staff members that are able to speak either in English or Spanish to them. And to be able to connect, not just, whenever we have our staff members that are secretaries that are bilingual, it's not just being able to speak two languages, it's being able to be bicultural.
Right.
Because the way that you speak to parents is a little different than you would with our, maybe our monolingual students. And so being able to be very sensitive to that is very important. We also deal with the fact that a lot of our students may not be, their parents and themselves may not be here legally. And so that is an issue that we have to deal with. So think how stressful that is whenever you get an official letter or you get a phone call from a school to a parent. So building those bridges is so much more difficult in a community like ours at Sheldon ISD, where we do deal with not only high economically disadvantaged, but we do deal with a lot of Hispanic families, and some of them may not even have the right legal paperwork.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Is there any difference that happens? So one of the things that I have general conversations with a lot of guests are the fact that kindergartners are very different than seniors in high school, in terms of their developmental stages and that sort of thing. When you're dealing with absenteeism, I know that the important communication is with the parent, but you're also communicating with the student. Are there any approaches that you all take with primary grades that might be different than you would take with, high school students or, something in between?
That is a great question. I think that would be the second part to what we do is that incentive. So the
Hmm.
incentives that we provide at, let's say, our early childhood academies, pre-K and kindergarten, so much different than the ones that we implement at the high school level. So at the high school level is more dealing with the students themselves. So the incentives that we try to provide is maybe a gift certificate to a fast food place that means a lot to our kids, or extra time for this or that, or maybe a ticket so that if you didn't do your homework, maybe you get a pass. That sort of thing that speaks to our students makes a big difference. At the elementary level, it's very different. It's all about the parents. If the students are not coming to school or if the students are
Right.
coming late, it is a reflection on the parents. And this is also at the elementary level. And so the incentives are so much different. You'll be surprised at the pre-K center if you give a parent the pass to be the very first in line to pick their student up whenever it is at the end of school. They love that. Or maybe have a VIP sit whenever there is a
Hmm.
student performance.
Hmm.
Parents love to come if there's a kindergarten or a first grade performance, being able to give them the first seat in the auditorium. So we think very creatively what incentive speaks to whom. And so it's very much targeted to that age level, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You mentioned that, since COVID, you've had successive years of improving your absenteeism rate. Where do you stand right now, and what are the objectives that you're trying to get to over time?
So just to give you an idea, before COVID, our ADA, average daily attendance, was about 96, 97. During COVID, we dropped down to 90. When
Hmm.
we came back, we went up to 92. And every year, we've been able to go up about a percentage to 2 percentage points. And what we do is we come up with the goal every year, an attainable goal. So
Hmm.
when we were at 92, our first year back, we said, well, do we think we can get to 93 or higher? And so having that in the forefront is extremely important because once you have a goal that can be attainable, but it's monitored, you'd be surprised what can be done and how our school administrators are able to achieve those goals.
Hmm.
And like, for example, this year we're at 95. Our goal is 95 or higher. I was checking the attendance, as a matter of fact, right before this meeting. Most of our campuses are sitting at a 95 or higher. So that
Hmm.
means that we're so close to getting back to where we were at before COVID. Mind you, most districts are going the other way. So we're very proud of that. That also brings a very interesting point of something else that we do. Once we identify that particular goal for that year, like I said, this year is 95, it allows our school administrators to be very strategic in identifying what we call the magic number. What do I mean by that? Well, if you want to reach your goal of 95, let's say that you have, let's make it simple, you have 100 students. Well, you know that your magic number is 5. That means you cannot have more than 5 students absent in any given day. And so if you have more than 5, you know that that day you need to start making phone calls to ensure that you do not have more than 5 students that day. And if you do, well, maybe the next day you can only have 3 days to make up for the other
Hmm.
day. And that truly helps to be very strategic in trying to increase your daily attendance.
And so I'm assuming that both you and then also your building administrators, they have sort of a dashboard that they can look at every day and see where their ADR is at. Is that right?
That is correct. That's where school status comes in. They have a
Hmm.
school dashboard that lets you know exactly what those numbers are. But it does a little more. It also tells you the specific students that are chronically absent so that you can make those phone calls on top of the daily phone calls that we make. And what we really like to see in the data is to be able to see patterns. What do I mean
Hmm.
by that? So, for example, we quickly realize that Friday is the day that the students, no surprise there, right?
Hmm.
Friday is the day where students miss the most. Well, guess what? Our incentives, they happen on Fridays. So maybe it's a popcorn day. You get free popcorn. Well, that's going to be on a Friday. Or maybe, at the end of the school day, we're going to have a movie day. Well, that's going to be on a Friday. For our elementaries, extra recess, guess what? That happens on a Friday. We also quickly realize that the days that the students are absent is maybe the day before the Christmas holiday or the day back from Christmas. A lot of our parents, like I said, are Hispanic. A lot of them do go back to Mexico, and they don't fully understand the schedule. So making those phone calls before we let them out on any particular holiday is that PD that I shared with you. Is that professional development for the parents? Just let them know this is the last day of school. This is when we do need them back, and you'll be surprised what that can do.
Yeah, I laugh a little bit because with my college students, we also have Popcorn Friday. I find popcorn to be a very good incentive for people walking around in the building. So,
Yeah, it's amazing what popcorn can do.
yes, absolutely. So, I'm not an expert like you are, and I'm not in your shoes, but it sounds to me like Sheldon has a very mature strategy, for addressing absenteeism. You have a partner in school status that helps you do that. You and I also know that there's a lot of districts out there that they know they have a problem, but they don't know where to start. Given your perspective and your experiences, what's the advice you would give maybe somebody sitting in a position like yours that they know that they need to start working on the issue of absenteeism, but they just don't really kind of know what bite of the apple to take? Where do they start on that process, do you think?
Wow, so that's a great question. I think one of the first things that needs to be done is to truly identify the problem and how much that is affecting you. Sometimes we educators get too caught up on the latest instructional program, on the latest assessment, on the results of the last state test. We call it the STAR test here in Texas. We get so caught up on that we forget to do the simple things right. It's amazing when you do just the simple things right, how much you can actually move the needle. So identify the problem is number one. Once the problem is identified, then rally the troops and bring people to the table and try to find out a solution to that problem in conjunction with everybody at that table. I mean, teachers, parents, administrators, bring everybody to the table. Show them the data. This is a problem. This is a big problem that we're facing. Not only does it affect students instructionally, but it also affects our funding. And once you do that, be able to come up with the plan. And once you come up with the plan, how do you do that? Well, you have to identify what the goal is. So this is what we're at today. Today we're sitting at, 92% of our students are showing up to school. That's too low. That's too low. That is unacceptable. Okay, well, where do we want to be? Where do we think we can be at the end of the year? So identify that specific goal. Once you identify that goal, begin to have conversations how we're going to get there. And you'll be surprised. The amount of brainstorming that comes out and what works and what doesn't makes a big difference. But it has to be monitored. You can't just do that at the beginning of the year and then forget about it. Something that we do is we check in every single month. At the end of every month, we do a check-in to find out where we're at. And then we have quarterly meetings with our principals where I meet with every single principal and their leadership team to find out where is your data, where have you been, are you meeting the goal, are you not, what is working, what is not, and then kind of share those ideas. And so it creates a certain level of competition. And so I think that's what it does it, but it has to be very organic. It cannot be top down where I come up with the ideas and I tell them this is what we're doing. It has to be very organic. They have to feel like they're part of the solution. But the secret sauce is to monitor. If it's not monitored, people do forget about it.
Yeah.
So that's what we do.
I think one sort of final area of question that I have, you've described how you all are implementing this in terms of the building administrators, really being your front line and using the data and then trying to reach out. Are there any wraparound messages that are important for the teachers? So in other words, if I'm a teacher and I have a student that has been identified as chronically absent, the interventions are taking place just as you described. Is there communication that needs to come back to me as the classroom teacher that is also helpful in this process?
Yes, that is a tremendous part of the implementation plan that we've completed here. Being able to have the teachers communicate to us when they do have a student. They're the first line of defense, if you will. They're the ones that will let us know what students are absent because, mind you, they're the ones that are taking attendance every single day. So they're the ones that let us know when a student is chronically absent. And usually, if a student is chronically absent, there's a bigger issue,
Yeah.
much bigger than just being absent. Rarely is the case that a student just stays at home for the sake of staying at home. Kids
Yeah.
like to be social, they like to see their friends, they like to interact. There's usually a bigger problem. It is when the teachers bring that up. And then when we bring the teachers to be part of the solution, a lot of the times they're the ones that do want to make those phone calls, right? They can't make those. Teachers do not have time in the day to make daily phone calls. We do at the front office. We make that a priority. But whenever it comes to a specific student that is a bigger issue, when you have the teacher making those phone calls, it makes a big deal. It makes a big difference. But teachers want to know that there's an administrator that is involved in the process, that sees what's going on, and notices when teachers do that. And so that constant communication, not just between school administrators and parents, but school administrators and teachers, is crucial. It takes all of it. It's a three-legged
Yeah.
stool, right? You have your parents, you have your teachers, but you have your school administrators that need to be part of that process.
And that's a great example of how, in your role, you're making the data provide the insight so that all of those different prongs to the success of the student, are informed and brought to bear on helping the student improve their attendance and, those sorts. And I also love how you use the phrase professional development for parents. I think that's really interesting. And I think that, even placing it outside of Houston, looking at really any location in the United States, there's going to be the need for parents to understand the importance of attendance and why that really is critical, not just for the student right now, but for them 5 years, 10 years down the road.
Right, right. Education is a team sport. It's important for everybody to know what position they play and
Yeah.
be able to play collectively. You'd be surprised. You can make a big difference. So yes, we're very proud of the work that our administrators, the work that our teachers, and our parents here at Sheldon ISD.
Yeah. This is a question that you may fairly not have a direct answer to, and that's fine. Are there any like success stories that you can think of? And of course you wouldn't name names, but where you saw an intervention happen and you're like, that student's life just changed because of, what happened with the staff, the teacher, and et cetera. And you've seen that, success take place. Are there any examples like that come to mind?
Oh my goodness, yes. No exaggeration. This happens almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
When you're in a community that is highly economically disadvantaged, the amount of things that our students have to go through is just amazing. Just to give you some examples, we had a student that his brother was in a car accident, and it was part of a gang affiliated activity, and so that affected the entire family. Well, you can only imagine what that does to the attendance of the siblings that just lost a brother. And so being able to bring our counseling, we have an incredible group of counselors into the campus, but most importantly into the community, but specifically that counselor being able to meet with the parents and be able to bring, that's what I mean by a wraparound service.
Yeah.
When you really wrap your services to the best of your ability to support the parents. And the question, but it always goes back to the goal. We're doing this so that your child can come to school on a regular basis. When we have our children in our classrooms, then and only then can we educate them. Can we help them with their mental health issues? Can we help them with nutrition? Can we help them with just about anything? But if they don't come to us and if they don't show up on a regular basis, it's impossible for us to do our work. Our parents begin to understand that and they see us as a partner, not as a threat. That's what makes a difference.
It's great. We've covered a lot of interesting ground in this discussion. Is there anything that you were excited to talk about that I didn't ask you about?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. I think there's a lot of specific nuances in each one of the strategies that I share. That at any point I can share with anybody that might be interested. Yeah, so I think the last thing that I like to share is that you have to know how to implement the basic things correctly to really make a difference.
I really appreciate your time, Juan. As I said, in the middle of this, it sounds like you have a very mature perspective on, how to combat this problem. And it's great to hear you talk about it in the way that you do with the detail that you're mentioning. And also, it's great to see that you're having such success with it. So congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you once again for inviting me to be part of this podcast.
Absolutely. My guest today has been Juan Duenas. He's the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services at Sheldon ISD in Houston, Texas. Thank you all for listening. Also, a special thanks to the staff of the podcast, April Koska and Trinity Sweet, who are the assistant producers. If you want to reach out to the podcast with ideas, suggestions, or just comments, you can always email us at teachingmatterspodcast, all one word, all lowercase, at ohio.edu, or of course, on our social media platforms. Thank you all for being an audience member today. We hope you have a great day.